In our previous episode, we detailed the brutal events of the Ner'naeth Enoediad, the Battle of the Unnumbered Tears, which quashed the elven hopes to defeat the Dark Lord for good. Further woe was to be wrought upon the defeated elves and humans. The Lord of Dor-lómin, Húrin, who saved the remnants of the Union of Maethros with his heroic rearguard action, had been captured and brought before Morgoth himself. Here this mere man refused to bend the knee to the tyrant and reveal the location of the secret elvish city, Gondolin. He and his line were cursed to live in misery and strife for this insolence. Húrin would be forced to witness all which befell his children upon the high peaks of Thangorodrim. So begins our retelling of the Children of Húrin. I am the elder king Melkor, first and mightiest of all the Valar, who was before the world and made it. The shadow of my purpose lies upon Arda, and all that is in it bends slowly and surely to my will. But upon all whom you love my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death. The curse of Morgoth upon the children of Húrin. Turin was the sole son of Húrin Thalion and Moren Elethen, with a younger sister named Urwen, nicknamed Lalaith because of her easy demeanor and frequent bouts of laughter. By comparison, he was an old soul with a sullen nature, and it was only on rare occasions that he was to speak. This mood was not improved when Lalaith passed away early in their childhood due to a plague. The situation in Dor-lómin was to worsen spectacularly following the Ner'naeth Enoediad, as the ever-deceitful Morgoth had betrayed his Easterling allies by ensconcing them within the less fertile lands of Hithlum. Frustrated by their place of low standing, despite their vital role in the Dark Lord's ascendancy, the Easterlings kept the Northerners in a state of perpetual repression. Morwen, pregnant with the final child of Húrin, surveyed the ever-darkening days of her people and decided upon a heart-breaking course of action. She would send Turin away to be fostered within King Thingol's halls in Doriath. The path was not an easy one. However, the safety of Turin and his companions was practically assured when they came upon one of the most formidable elves of that period, Beleg Cuthalion. He provided the weary company with food and guidance, and brought them to the halls of Thingol. Here, Turin would gaze upon the great marvels of Menegroth, a feat which had only been achieved by one human, Beren, one of the greatest of his kind. When Turin met Thingol, he was welcomed with great honor due to the feats of his father Húrin and his kinsman Beren. He was placed upon the king's knee, which was a sign that Thingol had adopted the boy as his own son. This was all the more surprising following the loss of his Luthien. Many elves believed that the actions of Turin's kinsman Beren played a role in the death of the king's daughter. Still, Thingol proclaimed, "Here, son of Húrin, shall your home be, and in all your life you shall be held as my son, man though you be. Wisdom shall be given you beyond the measure of mortal men, and the weapons of elves shall be set in your hands. Perhaps the time may come when you shall regain the lands of your father in Hithlum, but dwell now here in love." Thingol's wise wife Melian attempted to bring Morwen to Doriath in order to avert the doom of her children. Yet the latter would not abandon her people so lightly, and instead sent the great dragon helm of Dor-lómin. Thingol would safeguard this mighty relic of the House of Hador until such a time when Turin would be able to wield it as the head of his household. During this period, Turin learned much from the elves, particularly from an elf maiden named Nellas. Although the great darkness within his heart was lifted for a time, during his 9-year sojourn within Doriath, his restlessness was to return. His thoughts would often return to his mother and sister. He had never met Nienor, of whom he knew only that her beauty had become such that she was now considered a flower in the Grey North. During this stay, Turin had matured into a fine representative of the House of Hador. with his stature surpassing even the elves of Doriath. His strength and hardiness earned him great renown within the kingdom. From Beleg he learned much, and had begun to show signs of the peerless warrior and woodsman he was to become. Yet his manner and inherent sadness often held him back from forging friendships among the denizens of Doriath, which, combined with his more impressive characteristics, led one elf to envy and begrudge him. Still, King's counsellor Seiros seemed unable to provoke the young man, and the silence with which he answered his cruel jests only furthered the jealous grudge which the elf held against the scion of the House of Hador. Turin's 17th year was to prove a deciding one, bringing to an end the comfortable existence he had enjoyed within the girdle of Melian, as ill tidings now came from the north. Morgoth's power had grown exponentially, to a point at which all of the north now lay within his grasp, and no further word from the messengers of Thingol would come regarding the land of Dor-lómin. So Turin, who still has not reached manhood, took from the king the great dragon helm of his father and his father's father, and ranged far and wide alongside his mentor Beleg. Such was the fury and the weight of the doom which lay upon his shoulders that word soon raced throughout the lands of the north that Húrin himself had returned from the very depths of hell to wage war upon those who had wronged his people. 3 years would pass, with Turin devoting himself entirely to the cause of striking back against the Dark Lord, and in this time he began to care little for his appearance, or even the seat he had once held at the side of his foster father. On one of his seldom visits to his former home in Menegroth, he came within its halls only to discover that Thingol was in fact absent. Weary from his journeys, Turin took the first seat he could find, which happened to be by the side of the elders of the realm. Seiros arrived late, and presumed that pride caused Turin to take such a place. The councillor then began to belittle and torment the man of Dor-lómin, with one particular jest as to the quality of their womenfolk finally provoking Turin. At this, he cast his drinking vessel at the face of the elven councillor and drew his sword. If it were not for Mablung, he would have attacked Seiros. Sufficiently calmed by Mablung, Turin sheathed his blade and left without a word. Angered by his fellow elf's conduct, Mablung decreed that should any further ill come from the encounter, it should lay at Seiros's feet. However, the latter was not abated by such words, and attempted to waylay Turin as he left the kingdom. Unfortunately for the elf, the years spent in the wilderness had made the young man wary of such tactics. Seeing Seiros from the corner of his eye, Turin moved aside, and his strike split the elf's shield in twain. The fight which ensued was fierce, yet Turin combined the agility of an elf with far greater strength. He disarmed the elf, and with him now at his mercy, he threw the councillor to the ground and stripped him of his clothing. Seiros cried for help, and fled into the forests with Turin in mock pursuit. The councillor, fearing the wrath of Turin, ran ahead with such pace that when he came to a stream and failed in his leap across it, he crashed into the rocks and died instantly. Hearing the commotion, Mablung and the other elves came upon the scene, unaware of Seiros's attack. They asked Turin to go with them to face the judgment of Thingol. However, the son of Húrin was unwilling and left the kingdom with none eager to stop him for fear of further bloodshed. None among the people of Doriath knew where Turin was now headed, for he had kept his course secret until he came across an outlaw band based in the south of Brethil. He identified himself only as Naithan, or the Wronged, and as he was now in the full vigor of his manhood, the outlaws quickly realized that he far outstripped any of them in terms of strength of arms, and did not object to him joining their company. His prowess was further evidenced when the leader of the group insisted on terrorizing an innocent woman. In response, Turin slew the man, assuming his role as leader of the group. From now on, the band would only hunt orcs, and with Turin at their head, they would instill fear in all who served the Dark Lord within the region. Meanwhile, Thingol and Melian finally returned to Doriath, and the king called upon his councillors to direct his foster son's judgment. Mablung spoke at length, but could not forgive the slaying of Seiros despite the taunting. As a result, the king was about to pronounce his judgment, which would not favour his adopted son. At the last minute, however, Beleg burst into the hall and made overtures to be heard by his king. When this was accepted, he brought Nellas, who had witnessed the beginning of the fight. Her testimony would prove vital in exonerating Turin, and having questioned her at length, Thingol would pardon his adopted son and task Beleg with returning him to Doriath. Armed with the mighty black blade Anglachel, forged from the metal of a falling star, Beleg set forth with the blessing of Thingol and Melian. Beleg, unceasing in his efforts to find his dear companion of old, continued the search long after all other messengers of Thingol had given up the pursuit, and in FA 487 he came upon the band at the outskirts of the Amon Ruth. He was promptly captured and tied up here, for Turin was not with the band. Fortunately, he soon returned and had his friend released, despite the protests and continued distrust towards the elf from his lieutenant Andrug. Beleg initially attempted to have Turin return to Doriath with him. However, Turin showed the steadfast loyalty of his house, saying that he would not leave his men to their fate. As such, Beleg returned to Doriath in order to inform the king that his foster son was alive. In the meantime, Turin came upon the petty dwarves Mim and his son Kim. These were some of the last of their kind, a group of minor dwarves that came from the ancient Hold's exiles. The band hastily captured Mim, but in the scuffle, Androg accidentally slew Kim, which left the surviving father bitter and rageful. In exchange for his freedom, Mim was forced to share the halls he dwelt within on Amon Ruth with the company. He also received a payment of ransom for the death of his son. This is the reason behind the halls being nicknamed the House of Ransom. That winter, Beleg returned to Turin and won over many within the band through his aptitude for healing. Beleg also brought with him the dragon helm that Turin had left in Doriath, so the region became known as Dor Cuathol, or the land of bow and helm. Turin took up a new name in this epoch of his life, Gorthol the Dread Helm. Here the warrior would bring great fame and renown to the band, drawing many new recruits. As a result, a vast swath of western Beleriand was freed from the evil that had held the land in sway for so long. Yet the rage of Mim was to ensure that the curse of Morgoth would once more wreak havoc upon the House of Hador. The petty dwarf decided to get his revenge, so he met with the orcs, providing information fatal to Turin's band. His conditions included the return of his halls, iron and gold for all those caught, that Beleg was imprisoned and left to him, and that Turin was allowed to go free. Yet the conditions were somewhat altered by the orcs, who decided they would take Turin to Angband. To guarantee his cooperation, the orcs took Mim's surviving son, Ibn, hostage. So the petty dwarf led the orcish company to the Halls of Ransom. Although this was a surprise, the sentries bought the band a fraction of the time needed to prepare a defense. The orcs were initially driven back by the ferocity of man and elf, yet before long, the company was forced to retreat within the halls and roll a large stone across its entrance. Here, Andrug revealed a hidden stair, which led to the flat summit of Amon Ruth, where the small group of orcs who had made their way up the outer path were driven from the ledge. A last-ditch defense was mounted against the orcs now scaling the summit. However, there was little cover, and many of Turin's company were feathered by black arrows from below. Andrug was mortally wounded in such a manner. As only Beleg, Turin and 10 other men were left alive, they withdrew to the center of the summit, and, with their backs to a standing stone, started a desperate last stand. Their numbers dwindled until none but Beleg and Turin survived. These two were taken captive as the orcs ravaged the halls. While Turin was taken to Angband, Beleg was left to Mim, who was angered further by the sacking of his home. Unbeknownst to the petty dwarf, Andrug yet lived, and this valiant warrior had crawled inch by inch through the dead bodies of his comrades. Having already set his initial misgivings of the elf aside through the long war they had waged against the dying of the light, he saved his life, thrusting his blade towards the deceitful dwarf, who subsequently fled. With the last of his strength, Andrug cut the fetters which bound his comrade. As Beleg turned to heal his friend, the last of the men of the company bade him farewell, stating, "My hurts are too deep even for your healing." Beleg was now left alone among the slain, with only a frail hope that Turin yet lived. However, the elves of Beleriand had long since learned to live with naught more than a fool's hope to guide them. The woes of the children of Húrin were not to end here. However, this is the story for our next documentary on the history of the First Age. The next few videos in this series will be dedicated to the children of Húrin and the last desperate battles of this age, but we're planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing, as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We will try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.